Right, we come now almost to the panel session. Before we do that, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Tayyaba Khan, founder and CEO of the Khadija Leadership Network. Tayyiba's whakapapa of forced displacement inevitably led to 2 decades of serving migrant and refugee communities in government and third sector roles. Having now lived and worked in New Zealand, Palestine, Australia, and the UK, with the opportunity to apply her interdisciplinary qualifications of mental health and international development in practice, Tayyaba is deeply passionate about her work with minority and faith-based communities. Her latest voluntary passion includes building up Khadija Leadership Network and representing the European Muslim League as their New Zealand ambassador for peace. Congratulations on that. Please welcome our moderator for the panel session, Tayyaba Khan.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tātou katoa. Welcome, everyone. It is my immense pleasure to be your moderator for this evening. Can I please invite the esteemed panelists to join me on stage? Now would be great. I will introduce them, but I would like them to sit on stage. Oh, any order is fine. Yeah. Great, thank you. So, as you heard from Professor Paul Spoonley, March 15th has changed many things for the Muslim community. And we have an esteemed group of panelists here today who want to talk about a number of things from their expert perspectives for you all to listen and reflect upon. And they range from hate speech, political discourse, and religious diversity and what lies ahead. How the panel will run, and really this is about a conversation. They have actually given us their time and have prepared their presentations for you tonight so that you can engage with them. They are also very popular people, so I'm sure a lot of you are here so that you can have the opportunity to speak to them and to not only hear their insights, but to engage with them on that. So I'll start by introducing the panelists and give you a brief bio of who they are. How the panel will work is that we'll start from one speaker and then I will come to the floor and give you an opportunity to ask questions. And we'll take about 2 questions and then go to the next speaker. This is just so we're keeping you engaged and you're not just sitting there listening consistently for about an hour. So I hope that works for everyone and I know that will work for them. They really are here to interact with the audience tonight. So I'll start off with Professor Edwina Pio. She is the Fulbright alumni. Dr. Edwina Pio is New Zealand's first Professor of Diversity and University Director of Diversity at AUT. Her research encompasses the intersections of work, ethnicity, Indigenous studies, religion, and pedagogy. A thought leader, recipient of a Duke of Edinburgh Fellowship, judge of the New Zealand Diversity Awards, widely travelled and published. She's known for her praxis and action and rationally compassionate work on diversity and inclusion and its many facets in a volatile world. Many aspects of Edwina's life worlds have been structured by complexity of being a scholar of colour and a passionately engaged ethnic minority migrant woman educator. Wow, that's a lot. In October 2019, she received a Royal Society Medal for her work on diversity. Professor Edwina Pio. Next to her, we have Professor Douglas Pratt. Professor Douglas Pratt taught religious studies at the University of Waikato for over 30 years, retiring in mid-2018. And when he says retiring, he doesn't really mean that, and I'll explain that in the bio. Following the disestablishment of the religious studies program, currently he holds appointments as Honorary Professor in the Theological and Religious Studies program of the University of Auckland and Adjunct Professor Theology and Interreligious Relations in the Faculty of Theology, University of Bern, Switzerland. He's also an Honorary Senior Research Fellow, University of Birmingham, UK, Adjunct Professor Religion and Law in the Faculty of Law, the University of Fiji, and Associate Researcher with the Centre of Study for the Study of Religion and Politics, University of St Andrews, Scotland. Recently elected as a Fellow of both the Royal Historical Society and of the Royal Asiatic Society, his research interests include Christian-Muslim relations, interfaith dialogue, and contemporary issues in religion. Professor Douglas Pratt. Next to him, we have Ms. Anjum Rahman. Anjum is the project lead for Inclusive Aotearoa Collective Tahono, an organisation working to develop a national strategy on belonging and inclusion. She's also acting head and media spokesperson for the Islamic Women's Council of New Zealand. She's dedicated to breaking down the stereotypes about Muslims and about Muslim women in particular, and improving the lives of migrant women through advocacy and practical support. Anjum was involved in setting up Shama, Hamilton Ethnic Women's Centre, 16 years ago and remains heavily involved. She's a member of the Waikato Interfaith Council and on the governance board of the local funder Trust Waikato and the community access broadcaster Free FM 89. Ms. Anjum Rahman. And last but certainly not the least, Professor Peter Lineham. Professor Peter Lineham is Professor Emeritus, meaning that he has retired from his role as Professor of History at Massey University and Regional Director of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, but remains associated with the university in an honorary role. He's a respected scholar whose interests cover a range of subject areas that can closely be categorised under history and religion. He was awarded membership in the New Zealand Order, in the Order of New Zealand in the New Year's Honour List in 2019, and is well known for many of his published works. Professor Peter Lineham. So with that, we will have the speaker come to the podium, and once Professor Douglas Pratt has spoken, we will actually have two volunteers roaming around with the mic on the floor, and that's how we will operate. So with that, can I invite Professor Douglas Pratt?
Thank you. Tēnā tātou katoa. Salam alaikum. Peace be with us all. We are delving into a very important topic. Can I just move this? I don't know whose this is. I'm going to put... Right. And I've only got a few minutes to speak, so I'm going just to make a few points about three topics within our field. They kind of connect. The first thing that's come to my mind is thinking about the context of New Zealand, of Aotearoa, New Zealand, and this notion of free speech, which is in the air, that gets being talked about and is used to counter any suggestions that we should watch out for hate speech. Seems to me, in part anyhow, came in with 19th century immigrants from the UK mainly, who classified themselves as non-conformists and free thinkers. And New Zealand was seen as a haven for non-conformists and free thinkers. That is, people who wanted to pursue an alternative religious or non-religious identity over against the context of Britain, where they'd come from, where you have a state church and all that kind of thing. And so that's one element, this notion of non-conformists, of free thinkers. That was an identity. And they asserted the right to hold and give expression to a unique religious identity and not be subsumed under the status quo that they had left. This right, of course, did not include, that the right that was claimed, to include the carte blanche allowance to denigrate others and others' identities, although that happened, of course. But the right was not there for that because that was to deny what they were claiming for themselves. Right? This kind of notion about free thinkers, nonconformists, free speech, became entrenched within New Zealand's emerging social policy as a modern nation state. It's part of the foundation of New Zealand's secular identity. That is, a level playing field for all. No one religious group, no one political group can claim to rule over others. It's a level playing field. Okay, the concept of free speech that thus originated in a context of allowing for differences of political and religious views and identities to be openly held without fear of sanction. Fair enough. Thus, for example, one could argue or hold a position against the status quo without being labelled either treasonous or heretic. Now, those words don't get used much today, but that's where it came from. And just giving you an example, the Methodist Church, one of the groups that came out to New Zealand, it wasn't that long before where when the annual conference was held in Britain, one of the first motions that the conference passed was fealty to the Crown, because they were seen as a non-conformist, free-thinking group, and of course, in any kind of authoritarian state, a non-conformist, a free-thinker, is dangerous because they could be treasonous. So a group like that declared, no, we're loyal to the Queen, thank you, Mum, and then got on with the business. Okay. So that came into the New Zealand context as well. So holding a position, arguing for it. But note, the focus here is to argue, to have an opinion backed by evidence or rational argument, which in turn can be subject to evidentiary checking and rational scrutiny. That's what free speech is. Not saying what you like, but saying something that might be different to what other people are saying, but you have a reason for saying it. And that reason can be subject to scrutiny. Today, I fear too many people presume free speech is simply a right to be able to give voice to whatever I think or feel without consideration of evidence or rationality. This is the realm of pure prejudice and ignorance, of pure opinion masquerading as meaningful utterance backed by a warped notion of absolute right. That's my first thing. The second thing I want to say just briefly is this. I want to touch on a religious term that will be known to hopefully quite a number of us, the Torah. The Torah meaning the first 5 books of the Bible. The Torah meaning the first Semitic expression of the word of God. The Torah, which has been interpreted as law, but really means the way. Within this way can be found the 613 commandments that Orthodox Jews believe God gave to Moses to instruct the people of Israel about what is and how it is to live as a human being. Best known, of course, is the 10 Commandments, more often honoured in the breach, not the observance. However, there is an interesting dimension. A number of these commandments are couched in the negative, thou shalt not. But embedded in every negative is a positive implication. One such commandment is pertinent to the question of free speech. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbour. It's commandment 8 or 9, depending on the listing. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbour. The positive implication is that we are enjoined to bear true witness, to speak truly and respectfully of and to our neighbour. So for any Christian, for example, who takes seriously the guidance of Scripture, and you do not have to be a naive fundamentalist for this to be so, then the way, the Torah, we are to regard and relate to our religious and cultural neighbour is clear. Learn the truth of who they are and honour it, even if there is disagreement in detail. By all means, inquire, debate and argue, but on the basis of common ground of knowledge and understanding, on an equal footing of respect. All else is false witness. The implication for free speech is clear. And this brings me to my third point. The right to free speech was asserted by an anti-Islamic hate speech flyer entitled "Muslims Have Been Deceived" that emerged in New Zealand following the Christchurch massacre of 2019. It was placed on the windscreens of cars of the congregations of two prominent churches in Palmerston North one Sunday morning soon after the mosque attacks. These congregations had been prominent in their support of the local Muslim community. 4 things to note quickly about this flyer. It was authoritative looking, but utterly false and misleading. It gave a misleading summary of Muhammad's biography, including the egregious comment, "He turned to a life of crime," stated bluntly. It displays a classic fundamentalist, or what I might prefer nowadays to say, absolutist inability to understand language and its usage, including the difference between literal and figurative language. I find today there's an abysmal lack of understanding the nuance of language, the way language functions in our society. As a result, you have false proof texting contrasts. I mean, this is classic. You find all the texts you don't like about the other one, and all the texts you like about your own, and put them out and say, "See, I told you so, we're better than you." That kind of thing. But quite nastily done. Reinforced in the leaflet by underlining certain phrases, in the result asserting that Islam itself is a doctrine of hate and itself is a declaration of war. What disturbed me even more so was its reference to the New Zealand Human Rights Act and the Crimes Act to justify the comments made as being accurate, and that therefore this leaflet was not itself hate speech. We're just simply saying what is true and claiming under the Human Rights Act that's okay. But the Crimes Act was used to attack those who support Muslims and their coming to New Zealand as committing treason. It's stated. This is a direct parallel to the language and justification of Anders Breivik's actions in Norway 2011. It abets the ideological perspective used to justify and contextualise the March 15th, 2019 mosque attack. I myself was the subject of this kind of attack after Christchurch last year. I was accused of being responsible for Sri Lanka because of the comments I had made, amongst other things. Quite bizarre. Anyhow, this leaflet is but one example of maliciously false and misleading claims about Islam circulating today, and I've heard this kind of thing said in a variety of quarters. This approach, of course, is not about engagement and understanding. It's about denigration and rejection. Such comments do not express acceptance and respect. They reflect what I call the trap of culpable ignorance. Culpable ignorance, choosing not to actually consider another point of view or look for the truth. They are not free speech. They are, in fact, hate speech in action. Wherever and however they appear, they need to be resisted and challenged. And that's what we have to do for the future. Thank you.
Excellent on timing. I'm glad that's not something I have to police. Thank you so much, Professor Douglas Pratt. In your words, today, too many people presume free speech is a right to be able to give voice to whatever I think or feel without consideration of evidence or rationality. Thank you for your whakaaro. Thank you for your thoughts and reflections. I will now call on my two lovely volunteers to maybe just roam around with the mic and give you all an opportunity to ask a question or two with what you've just heard. And the panel is more than welcome to also pitch in if you like.
Kia ora. Thank you for your speeches so far. I would like to see what strategies that we as individuals can do, like in the way that we try and combat coronavirus by hand washing and all that. What can we do in terms of combating hate speech and also strengthening the voice of minority communities, particularly Muslim faith, and get it into the New Zealand law?
Is this working? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. No, thank you. I'm glad you mentioned the coronavirus, because it occurs to me that it's rather intriguing that this year we are dealing with a medical virus and we're all running scared. Last year we were dealing with an ideological virus. We realised there were steps need to be taken, but we haven't got to the point of washing our hands of it yet. And that came through earlier. And so I think that it's difficult as individuals, because sometimes being confronted with bigotry is hard to actually stand up to. But the more that people can do that and call people out, the better. But I think that it's at group community levels. I think there are, my hypothesis would be, and because I haven't been able to test this, it's difficult to test, but I think it's a reasonable hypothesis that there are rather too many Christian communities who harbour a negative misperception of Islam, and that to me becomes a seedbed for supporting indirectly extremism. And it came out, for example, in 2011 with Anders Breivik, when a noted New Zealand journalist declared shortly afterwards, he expressed what a lot of people were feeling, that is, what a terrible thing it was for this man to go and shoot all these young people and blow up a building. But I can understand why he did it. That was the phrase that really got me. And you picked this up, and of course there was a brief, I was actually delighted to see that it was suppressed in the media, but there was a brief report just, I think, either yesterday or the day before, that how on March the 15th, the video of the attack was rescreened on certain channels, the right-wing channels and so on, and people were celebrating it, and that the terrorist was being hailed as a hero. From my point of view, all we've had so far is Act 1 of a 3-act play. Act 2 is going to be the trial and how that's handled, because that's all part of it, the whole thing. And then Act 3 is what happens afterwards, when he becomes a martyr for the right-wingers, unless you can find a way of neutralising that. So there's a whole lot of ramifications, but I think you're a good question, but it's one we all have to face. How do we actually combat it?
I'll give you a few really practical examples. Be mindful with your clicks. Do not click on stuff that you know is inflammatory. Don't click on the material from people that you know regularly aim to inflame. And you know the kind of people I'm talking about. When you're calling out hate online, do not retweet or share the material. So if you want to refute it without referring to the person or sharing their tweet or the link to their article. Starve it of the publicity. And I'll be talking more about that in my speech. Thirdly, organise. So find like-minded people and work collectively together. These issues will not be solved by individual action. They need collective action, so collectivise. We will have to stay at home now, use your Zoom, use your internet, you've got plenty of time. Use it wisely. Fourthly, choose your leaders well. Where you have the ability to choose, be informed and make a wise choice, and do not reward the people that use hateful rhetoric with your vote or other choosing mechanism. All right? And I had another one, but I've forgotten. And I will, if I remember, I'll say it. But those are immediately things that you can do right now that will absolutely have an impact.
Thank you, Anjum. Do we have one more question on the floor before we go to our next wonderful speaker? No? Okay. Well, with that, I would like to hand over to you, Anjum.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Anjum Rahman tuku ingoa. Kua tai mai aho ki te tautoko, te kaupapa o tēnei rā. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the mana whenua, their history, their struggles and their aspirations. I'd like to share the following whakatauki, which a friend offered to me. Naku te roro no te roro ka ora ai te iwi. With your basket and my basket, the people will live. And this whakatauki is important in this particular time, especially when we all need to be thinking about the collective to ensure that a virus doesn't spread, that we need to join and we need to share. I want to acknowledge the victims of 15th of March, those who passed, the injured, those who were present, and all of their families and friends. That event was an expression of hate. What caused that person to be so full of hate? It's a journey. It doesn't just happen overnight. People don't just decide all of a sudden to pick up a gun and go and shoot people in that fashion. So how does the journey start? As any police officer will tell you, and most wise people will tell you, that major criminal activity starts with petty theft. It starts with shoplifting. Those small things that if we don't get to them at the beginning, create, spiral and get worse. And so with hate, it starts with small acts of dehumanization. When we can start to see other people as a little bit less human. And as always, when you're not the first speaker, the person before you takes part of your speech. But let me expand on what Professor Pratt has said. We start to define people by their faults. Now think of it as an individual. Imagine if a person took the worst things that you did, the times when you were petty, the times when you were mean, the times when you were tired and you lashed out and said something cruel. Imagine if someone collected all of those things and presented them to the world as if that was the whole of you. And there's not a person sitting in here who's not susceptible to that. We have all done things that we aren't proud of, that we know we could have done better, and if someone took those things and presented them as if that was all that you were, because that's what happens to a community. You start with demonising a group and that group's characteristics, and then you start to place the blame of everything that you see that is wrong in the society that you live in on those people. They're taking your jobs. They're buying your houses. The economic downturn, it's them. The housing crisis, it's them. Anything you can think of, it's them. At the same time, as Professor Pratt did point out, we see in ourselves everything that is good. We hold everything that is virtuous. We ignore our own faults. And because we are the holders of virtue and good, we must protect it. We have to protect what we have from these people who are taking everything away from us, which then leads to fear, it leads to anger, and that is only a step away from violence. There is no doubt that hate is a political tool. Hate gains attention. I like to call it the Trump effect. And it's not just him, it's used in New Zealand, it's used across the world. Say the most outrageous, most hateful thing that you can think of, and it is splashed across the world news. It's somehow, man says something stupid is still a news story. I don't know why, but it always is, all the time. And the media will pick it up, and social media will pick it up. Wasn't that a terrible thing? He says, oh my God, he's so racist. We pick it up in a negative way. We call it out for what it is. But what happens is that this person gets their message to the people that will respond to it. The amount of free publicity that people who use this technique get is in the tunes of billions of dollars, simply because everybody responds, everybody speaks to it. Did you hear what he said today? And it is promoted everywhere. What we have now, of course, is that it's much easier to spread through social media. So the viral effect is much, much greater. And we have seen across the world that different social media have been used in different ways in different countries. So, for example, the far right very successfully used YouTube algorithms to win elections in Brazil. Trump has violated every rule of Twitter, every code of conduct that they have, and yet remains online. Facebook was used, and the best example we've seen was the Brexit campaign, how data was misused and how advertising was breaking all their electoral laws. In India, we've seen the RSS and the BJP use WhatsApp as a way to promote their messages. And of course, various groups have used the comment sections of media websites to the extent that most media websites have had to remove comment sections. Make no mistake, all of these campaigns are very, very well organised, and they are very well resourced. If you look at the BJP campaign, like if you think we have rich people here, nah. We don't have rich people. India has like really, really, really rich people, and they put a lot of money into those campaigns. But we know that other governments are doing it. We know Russia's involved. I could name you several other governments. That this is organised and well-funded activity. And they are using techniques like bots, which if you don't know what that is automated accounts. They are using paid trolls, so people are being paid to be online, to spread hate and disrupt conversations and to change minds, and it works. They wouldn't do it if it didn't work. It has worked in every age. It has worked in every country, that if you give people something to hate and something that is a threat, and you place yourself as the protector against that threat, I don't know what it is about the human condition, but we believe it every time. So the question is, how do we change this? I already gave you some practical examples. We know at government level there are things happening like the Christchurch Call, which is bringing together tech companies and governments and civil society organisations in effect, hoping to effect change. Whether that will be actually successful yet remains to be seen. They have been successful in one regard, in that there have been several killers who have tried to live stream their mass killings, and those have not gone viral. So the hash sharing database and those sorts of things are having some effect. And certainly the event in Christchurch and the work of our government has placed a lot of pressure on tech companies, but it is nowhere near enough. I want to take the last few minutes, I don't know where I am on time, but I'll try and hurry, to talk about what I'm doing in this space. So last year, and it started well before last year, we knew that we needed in this country a national strategy on diversity and inclusion. We knew that the government needed to do it. We knew that there were great programs and lots of wonderful work happening in the community, but nobody was taking a step back, taking a strategic look at what was needed, how we could do it in a more planned and coordinated way so that it could have greater impact. The government was not interested in any such thing, and after the 15th of March attacks, they appeared to remain uninterested. But I was lucky enough to connect with some various people who offered to me the chance to develop a national strategy outside of government. And so that is the work that I'm doing now. And as part of that work, we are touring around the country. We're planning to go to 60 towns and cities, and we've already done the first leg of the west coast of the South Island and some of central Otago, basically sitting with groups of people and asking them three very simple questions. When do you feel like you belong in Aotearoa, New Zealand? What is stopping you from feeling like you belong? And what needs to change in order for you to belong? They are very deceptively simple questions. They were designed to be accessible to all sorts of people who may have English as a second language, literacy issues, and so on. It is available, survey is available on our website, which is inclusiveaotearoa.nz, and I have some cards happy to share afterwards. Next year we plan to implement the strategy, but I know that I'm out of time, so haha, suspense.
Oh, thank you, Anjum. So in your words, you have said our response must be equally well-resourced and organised. Our communities need to be motivated and united, which requires an ability to negotiate and compromise. So with that, any questions from the floor?
Tēnā tātou katoa. Tēnā koe Anjum. Mihi atu ki a koe mō tō kōrero he toha mai. No reira kei te mihi. I've found your presentation very intriguing. As I can admit myself that I've fallen to that particular trap of feeding that beast. Particular around hate speech that is being blasted across social media to do with my people and hidden under the auspice of satire. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about and are aware. It is very difficult to deal and walk in that space. And tough to turn a blind eye. Oh, not so much a blind eye, but tough to actually try and not respond to that type of comment. So, if you can offer a comment to how it was dealt with by, I guess, Māori in the response that they actually our Māori actually responded to that in a way which they could not sit back and take any longer. We've heard the outcome that's happened in the news of late. However, I understand where you're coming from with, your point of view and your perspective and how we should effectively deal with hate speech disseminated through social media. do you have a comment in terms of the way in which tangata whenua responded to that particular satire?
Thank you. So the first thing I would say is my advice is to not be silent. I think you do respond, right? But the way that you do it is by responding in your own words in a positive way rather than sharing what the person has said. So don't promote what they've said, but certainly build up your social media audience, say what you have to say. In terms of the response to the particular person and the court case and so on, I thought it was a pretty amazing response. I fully backed the woman who did so. It was appalling that she was dragged through court in that way and then had to, the person just walks away and left her with all the grief, the stress, the cost. It is actually appalling. I was at the Hamilton Press Club lunch last year and Moana Jackson was invited as the speaker for that event. And the question that I asked him, and this must have been around June last year, and things were still pretty raw. And so as I was asking him, I promptly burst into tears and could barely get the question out. But what I said to him was, we have been dealing with government for what, 4 or 5 years? Like actively engaging with government for about 4 or 5 years, and I am done. Like, I'm done, I've had it. Like, that is it, that's me. I can't deal with this anymore. How is it that your people have managed to keep fighting for 200 years? And how is it that you guys get up generation after generation against governments that are actively hostile against you, that are actively trying to undermine you, incarcerate you, take your rights and your property, and yet you all are still here and you're still getting up to fight? And for me, like, this is an example. Like, this should be like when we're teaching our kids in school, this is the history that we should be teaching, that here are people who get up again and again, and you're still here and you're making gains and you just keep pushing. And for me, I'm going to cry again because it's something that I really admire and I wish I had that, and I take a lot of strength from it. And I also want to tautoko Ngāi Tahu for their work after the 15th of March attack, which was a huge part of the healing and recovery for our community. And even now in the mental health space, it is the Maori providers who are training up Muslim social workers. So, their support and their connection has been so strong, and I have to say I really, really admire it.
We have a question at the front. Yep.
Assalamu alaikum, Anjum. You mentioned you were going around the country, but since you mentioned Moana Jackson, I was wondering, have you touched base with Jeffrey Palmer and Moana, because they are in a project where they are trying to advocate for a New Zealand constitution, because we know in New Zealand we are not protected. We are at the mercy of the parliament, because there's this notion in New Zealand of parliamentary supremacy. Unlike in the United States, it is important for New Zealand to have a codified written constitution to protect the minorities. So I was thinking, inclusive Aotearoa, to work with Moana and Jeffrey Palmer, because they are going around the country to look for ways in which New Zealand could adopt a constitution so that we are not at the mercy of the 200 and something men and women who are in parliament, who cannot do anything when minority rights are infringed. Because we have New Zealand Bill of Rights, but it's nothing when the parliament is there. So I was just wondering.
Yep. So I've been given the report that Moana Jackson did from his series of conversations with tangata whenua communities, and there was to be next Saturday the event at the marae. I've forgotten the name of the events, but they're doing this whole series of webinars around tiriti and racism, anti-racism and those sorts of things. And they had a full day event there. I'll be doing a webinar as part of that on Sunday. But that was going to be my big opportunity to meet him and talk to him, and it's been cancelled, coronavirus. So I will have to await another opportunity, but absolutely. Our project is not to replace anything that anyone is doing. It is, at this stage, what we're doing is simply bringing forward the voice of the people in terms of their feelings of belonging. I absolutely agree with you. I remember at least 7 or 8 years ago there were consultations done by the government around the Constitution, and I went to those. See, my big concern is that the majority of people in this country still are anti-tiriti and they are anti-minority rights. Let's remember that the United Nations had just put out that compact against migration, which was supposed to protect us, right? That's what was spray painted on the killer's gun. It was used to kill us, right? So that's why it's like how we have to be so careful in this space, and that's why collective action and working together is so important. And I absolutely support the work they're doing, and I hope that they reach enough people. But it's up to us to carry on that work as well. It's up to us to persuade as many as we can and to speak back when we feel safe to, and to stand alongside whenever we can. But yeah, short answer, yes, I would love to connect with them.
Thank you. That was my timer beating me to it. So the floor is yours, Professor Peter Lineham.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Salam alaikum. Special greeting to you, sir, and what you've been through and what you've survived and what you symbolise. It's very important in discussions like this to remember the dimensions of the pain that hate speech causes and has left indelible marks on our society. What I want to suggest to you tonight is that we are at times in danger of thinking that the solution to the threat of hate speech is effectively to require us all into some kind of political middle ground where we don't express disagreements. In contrast, I think if you listen to the panel carefully, in fact we're advocating that there is an important place for the expression of disagreement and of debate, but it's actually teaching the tone and character of the way that debate should be conducted, which is the critical requirement for our generation. And the difficulty is that, take coronavirus. With coronavirus, there's instant things apparently, well, not quite, but in theory, that you can do as a protection. But the real concern is that there is no simple way to deal easily with the prevalence of hate speech, precisely because in our very globalised society, people resort to identity politics in order to secure themselves. Now, I wonder if we don't need to teach instead better ways in which identity can be expressed when we relate to one another. Because I think much of the problem comes from a very, very long history where, let's face it, for many, many centuries, Christians from their territories, Muslims from their territories, and I mean, it's especially an issue for monotheistic religions, I think, but it is also true that among the Buddhist and Hindu communities, similar issues have emerged, but they've gone unchallenged because in that space, well, in fact, the culture encouraged you to express your identity, and nobody would, of course, dream of challenging you. Today, clearly, we're in a very different place, and isn't it wonderful to be in this different place where we are together, but we need to be together in our diversity. Now, I say that because I am struck that in Western society, the model that is often presented today as the solution is the secular model, defined as meaning that we shouldn't bring religion or political differences into the place which causes tension or disagreement. But look, this is not, in fact, going to be constructive in our contemporary society. It is extremely important that I may speak from my Christian convictions to you with your Muslim convictions, and that in that disagreement we will find actually growth, not simply of understanding, though I think understanding will grow from that, but also growth of space that we create for each other to live and to prosper and to see our society live and prosper. Now, thinking about the history, so often the story can be told simply from one perspective. So you'll be well aware that you can do a long trail through, this is really Doug's territory, not mine, but a long trail through Islam-Christian relations, and one should really add relations with Judaism as well, because it's equally complex and serious and important. And in each of those cases, there are horrific stories, of course, of abuse, and, you know, for the Christian side, the Crusades is the one that always springs to mind among Muslims and Christians. But I wonder if we were to tell the parts of the story where there were relationships, whether we could actually see that, I mean, it's easy enough to understand how the Crusades happened in the most primitive part of Europe. Whereas meanwhile, in that part of Europe in the east, on the site of modern-day Turkey, I mean, there Greek Christians and Muslims learned over centuries to work together and to cooperate, and both regarded the behaviour of the Western Christians who arrived as kind of weirdly barbarous in the way in which they responded. But even from Western Christianity, think in the midst of those terrible events, that extraordinary moment when Francis of Assisi set sail across to Egypt to meet the Sultan and to express a relationship in which he wanted to have a religious discussion and he wanted to express love. It's so interesting to know that there is a separate discourse that needs to be placed alongside the discourse of disagreement. It's not that Francis was compromising on anything or that the Sultan was compromising on anything. And of course, looking on, one may wonder how they even understood it, and perhaps they didn't really understand each other. But they wanted to find a place where they could listen to each other. And I think that discovering that real historical experience of dialogue might enable us to do what we need to be able to do in our contemporary society. I want to hear my Muslim brothers and sisters speak what is on their heart. I do not want you to feel so pressured by the New Zealand environment you think, well, I really shouldn't say that I believe that Allah is, indeed the true and only God. I would want you to have the space to say that, as I would want to have the space to say that there's a real sense in which we are worshipping one God, and there's a real sense in which we have disagreements about our understanding of that. But we will be the better, not for hiding our disagreements, but for showing a model of ways in which that may be expressed faithfully, clearly, honourably. And think what Anjum said about language, well expressed, carefully expressed. And that's, I think, the bit that we so much all need to learn. What is a language of clear, appropriate, understanding discourse? Is it too much to hope that, in fact, modelling that may present a positive thing that we may do in the face of large numbers of, Paul's account was depressingly concerning. I do not want to go to the dark web and discover the miseries of what people are saying, but I feel the need that we will model appropriate ways to express it. I spend a lot of time talking to strange religious minorities. In recent weeks, I've been talking about the Shincheonji, which is the religious sectarian group in Korea, among which the coronavirus has spread. And I found myself on Korean radio stations describing, I'm intrigued that nobody in Korea seems to be the expert, and perhaps nobody dares in that context. And what I then got into, a series of them started writing to me, you see, and I tried to explain, not that I got any reply, but you can try to explain that, yes, it is a critical point that we all need to consider we may be wrong. And if I approach that conversation in that approach, that I do it within my integrity, but I do it willing to listen to the other, then I think there is some hope that the identity politics, which really is on the rise in almost every direction, will not destroy a society, but create, I think, a model where a society is held together because we believe in the value of people being people of convictions. I have a sore shoulder at the moment, and the physio sold me for an outrageous $9 this bizarre little spiky ball. And the theory of the spiky ball is that if I can lie on it when I sleep, the irritation of the spikes will in the end take that tender, wounded muscle and make it, well, I probably got the science all wrong, but make it so it's able to function as it should do, able to be responsive, able to twist and bend as the body's meant to twist and bend. It's the most horrible experience. None of us likes to be in a world where, we are challenged in what we think. But I think we will be infinitely the stronger if we encourage a society where we speak with faithfulness and truthfulness and love to one another.
Aren't they just wonderful so far? I love it. You've got your hand up already, ready to go. Great. So before we go to questions, so in your words, Professor Peter Lineham, I urge that we need to find a better model of an open society in which we can speak faithfully and clearly to each other in ways that are true to our religious convictions, yet build community and stop hate. And with that, I will go to the question on the floor.
Thank you, all you, for coming. It's a bit of a long-form question, so humor me. Basically, I've been in New Zealand since a child, raised in a Muslim family. I was young when September 11th happened. Since then, I've basically gotten used to my religion being demonized. It's more or less something that I've learned to tolerate and not particularly respond to. But in the way that I understand my culture, I came to appreciate Western norms, Christian norms, Enlightenment values. Professor Paul Spoonley was talking about classical liberalism. And to me, it's a difficult discussion here because we have this idea of free speech and hate speech. Obviously, in New Zealand and Europe, for example, there is restraints around speech, but I think the fact that we refer to America so often is because it really is where much of our influence comes from. We seem to follow in their stead. And with them, speech is constitutionally protected. So John Stuart Mill made a utilitarian argument for free speech. He said, it's a way for us to discuss any and all ideas, maybe not even ideas that we necessarily agree with. Some ideas might be dangerous, but we are willing to have open discourse. And my question is that what I've seen from the talk about hate speech is that a lot of people on the side of ideas that I oppose seem to think that if there is this hedging of hate speech, that because they can't openly discuss their ideas, that somehow they're right. Somehow we can't tolerate an argument. We can't have a debate. There is nothing to say. They're obviously right. And to me, I want to have the debate. I want to have the discussion. I've seen the data. I've seen the numbers. I have the arguments that I want to make. I think sunlight is the disinfectant. What do you think?
Fundamentally, you'll see that I am agreeing with you, that I think there is an appropriate space in which we should be able to declare that which is our conviction. Now, this is where Professor Spoonley's reminder that hate speech is pretty clearly defined. That hate speech speaks against a person and incites violence or damage to the good of that person. I'm not sure I've got that exactly right. I'm happy to have the specialists. But that is not produced by you saying, but you're wrong about Islam. It's not like that. And I think it's mighty important that we have these conversations, but we need to do it on the basis of, unfortunately, we've got to commit ourselves to relating at the same time as disagreeing. And this is hard work. I wrote about Destiny Church, and I'm reasonably expert on sort of pondering the sometimes nonsense that Brian Tamaki says. But mostly he's speaking from a rational basis from within his own framework. And the first step that I needed to have was to understand why he had those concerns, why he felt that way, what was the framework that made it coherent. So I needed to do the process of trying to understand him and then to challenge and disagree, but to do so in a way that was respectful as well. It's a very, very difficult exercise to get right, but I think something is wrong in the society if you can't appropriately defend that which is precious to you. But be careful how you do that, because the process of doing it may backfire and actually be destructive rather than positive. If we can learn good speech, then that will be constructive, I think.
I feel like I've talked too much already, but I just want to make 2 points. First of all, that whole free speech premise that you talked about didn't include the notion of power. Who has the power to speak and who has the greatest reach? And until we can equalise the power, then everyone doesn't have equal speech, right? And the issue that we have, like say before the internet, was who had the reach. So I'm thinking soon after 9/11, and it was, Muslims had no voice in the media, like literally none, and every commentator in the country was talking about Muslims, and we had no right of response. So it's all very well to say let them speak so we can apply sunlight to it, but when you don't have the power to apply the counter argument, which is often the case, then all that is left is their argument. The second point I would make is that, for example, the Southern and Molyneux, but so many other people are not interested in a debate. They are not interested in a contest of ideas. What they are interested in is making money. This is how they sell their video clips and their books, and they fill out lecture halls and charge $180, $200 a speaker and so on. For them, this is a money-making exercise. There is nothing that you could say. You could give them all those facts and figures at your fingertips. They are not here to be persuaded. They are not interested in being persuaded. They don't care who is right. They care about how many people they can make pay to come in the door. And in that situation, shining a sunlight is not going to help.
Professor Douglas Pratt, did you want to make a comment or no? Okay, all right. So I'm really sorry. We are stretched for time, and there are high expectations of the last panellist. I'm expecting poetry. So with that, Professor Edwina Pio.
Now, my harimai, to all people of the heart, the wonderful audience who've been here for a few hours, my distinguished colleagues, starting with the keynote, Professor Paul Spoonley, who influence and impact our nation and each other. Tēnā koutou, inga iwi, inga rio, inga monga, inga awa, tēnā koutou katoa. Katu tahi tātou, ki te momahara, I tewa mamai o te iwi, no reira ka nui te aroha. I share the sorrow that this remembrance recalls, and as a nation, we grieve together. The tragic events of 15th March 2019 in Christchurch struck our Aotearoa like a thunderbolt. Turu turu ti au, the world weeps. As the haunting grief casts its dark shadow 1 year on, I bear witness to faltering dreams, rebuilding dreams, and the infinitely varied aspects of diversity. As many of my previous panelists and the keynote have already alluded to, religious diversity calls for developing a new repertoire to rethink and remold our citadels of ideological imperialism. A repertoire, a lexicon and vocabulary that allows individuals to think and talk about diverse religions in more deep and meaningful ways, and that gives permission for people to bring their sacred selves to all aspects of their experience, yet being mindful of the need to honor the neighbor and stranger in our midst, for we too were once strangers in this land. In fact, religion, which is supposed to help us cultivate the sense of the sacred, inviolability of every single human being, often seems to reflect the violence and desperation of societies and to evaporate our common humanity. Once upon a time, there was a young man. A lot of the people who are radicalized tend to be young men, troubled by the balancing of free speech and hate speech. He goes to his tipuna to solve his dilemma. The tipuna answers in her inimitable style. Free speech opens doors to plurality. Dialogue for multidimensional perspectives and rationally compassionate actions. But where do we draw the line? How can we address the slippery ground of unfettered hate to ensure a robust public discourse and freedom that is the beating heart of democracy? Freedom and hatred must be conceptualized as a process against a backdrop of geography, history, social, political, and technological contexts. For many, activism and free speech means you are cool. But what kind of activism is the question? Bombing of Muslims, Jews, Christians? Responsibility and balance is necessary for ensuring free speech. And I'm repeating here a number of things that my previous panelists have said. Without dialogue, we have free rein for vitriolic hate speech. Anything goes permissiveness, building bastions of anti-immigration as well as anti-white narratives. Read a lot of what's being written in the Middle East, for example. Obscenity, vile messages, radicalization, and faith-based violence. Lack of dialogue and lack of rationally compassionate actions can serve as a breeding ground, creating a terrestrial climate and echo chambers to fertilize and foster violence, intimidation, and subversive platforms such as 8chan, 4chan, Gab, and what? Or the dark web that Paul referred to. Online data and news diets are peopled by dark figures. And it is important to understand, and I repeat, that hate crime is a process rather than a discrete event. Extremists use the rhetoric of threat, otherness, and invasion to increase online polarization, including fake news, deep fake, and power to information insurgents. It is noteworthy, and this is from research from the British Journal of Criminology, that although not all people exposed to hate material commit hate crimes, all hate crime criminals are likely to have at some stage been exposed to hate material. No doubt, the algorithms used for data mining and data processing filter, rank, and move individuals towards certain sites. Many internet platforms, code writers, and programmers sign no code of ethics and are not necessarily interested in principles of fairness, objectivity, and civility, notions often deemed as antiquated. Idiotology, in contrast to ideology, in various disguises is constantly recycled, creating a combustible, toxic cocktail of hate and misinformation. Stoked by moral outrage and noxious disquiet, it is an unsettling paradox that years of harmonious behavior seem to be wiped out in one fell swoop, and latent stereotypes manifest their ugly face. In many instances, our worst selves have surfaced with the miasma of microaggressions. This toxicity seems to spur diminished faith and hope in humanity's ability and competency to handle increasingly complex, large-scale, ambiguous crisis situations. So hand washing is a physical thing that we can quickly do. But as was mentioned, I mean, how do we hand wash, like Pilate did, for example, with reference to hate speech? Social media enables disinhibition, de-individuation, and provides a safe haven and shield for hate speech perpetrators. And of course, lone actors can also be self-radicalized via the internet. This wicked interplay can only subside if we handle threat perceptions with common sense restraint and short, medium, and long-term strategies embellished with pragmatic Kiwi ingenuity. Mori tu, mori ora, mori noho, mori mate. Standing and moving together begets prosperity, whereas idleness and remaining stagnant begets poverty. But permanent change takes time and is an evolving process. There must be a multi-pronged, concerted strategy at educational and organizational levels rather than relying solely on our government to initiate changes. We must do what we can within our own span of control. For change can be effervescent unless buttressed by continuous messages of how to interact with diversity. I want to emphasize a virtuous cycle through conversations, engagement with diverse groups, reflection, and hopefully change. In the enigmatic task of transcending history through a wise praxis, there is the necessity to understand that the particular is woven into the universal. We must remember every day the possibility of fracturing universes where ideological imperialism dominates. We must have reflective stances and accountable actions to create and illuminate our better selves through Kaitiakitanga as guardians and inheritors of this planet. It is again poignant to remember that Mori tu, Mori ora, standing and moving together begets prosperity. Therefore, my final message today is, fill your hearts with dreams. Embrace multidimensional perspectives. Act with rational compassion. And put back into the kete, or the basket of life, for the privilege of living. And for the miracle of each day in our journey on this beloved earth. Mori tu, mori ora. Thank you.
Never fail to deliver. Thank you. That was beautiful. That was beautifully said. So with that, if you'd all like to applause for our wonderful panel tonight who have given us their time.